Glad to see you all and new people and some regular visitors of our webinars. So good evening, Europe. Good morning, Americas. And today, Australia. This is another webinar hosted by Uecna, the voice of airport residents in Europe, fighting noise and air pollution from aviation. I am Dominique Lazarski, Uecna's chair. The topic of the discussion today is whether caps at airports are a good idea. Caps at airports came back to the top of the list of discussion topics with Amsterdam's decision to lower its annual traffic cap. Shouldn't all airports have caps? Some airports already limit the amount of traffic with a slot cap, a movement cap. But we notice that it doesn't prevent noise from raising. A cap in numbers of flights may then not be sufficient. And what are the consequences of having a cap at an airport? Where will the exceeding traffic be accommodated? Will it be diverted to another nearby airport, or will it be a global reduction of traffic at a given country? John Stewart, Uecna's vice president, will share his views and experience on the subject. And Eleftheria, you have the floor to introduce John. You have to unmute, Eleftheria.
Sorry for that. You all know, welcome everyone. You all know by now John Stewart, who is our vice president in Uecna. John has been involved in the fields of transport and noise for nearly 40 years. For 20 years, he has coordinated HACAN, the organization which gives voice to residents under the Heathrow flight paths. He was liaised with both the Department of Transport and UK Aviation at a senior level. He is the author of a number of publications, including Why Noise Matters and the association Leaves No Traces. Currently, John chairs both the Campaign for Better Transport and the UK Noise Association. He's one of Uecna's representatives on EASA, and he is a member at the EU Noise Expert Group. John will outline his experiences at Heathrow and London City airports and speak a little about other airports. Afterwards, he will receive your questions so we can have a discussion about the matter of caps of flights at an airport. John, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Eleftheria, and thank you to Dominique. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, can you all see the screen?
Not yet, John.
Not yet. Okay, let me just see what's happening, because I can see the screen, but you can't.
Stop the sharing and start again, maybe, John.
Yeah. Right.
And press the button share.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get the presentation again, though, Dominique. It's just disappeared for a minute. Sorry, everybody, about this. Right. No. Can you see something now?
Yes, it's good now.
Yeah,
Go into
okay. So
presentation mode
I
and
just now have
that will
to
work.
slightly play around with it. Um, okay, I think I can all see you, and hopefully you can see the screen. So sorry for that little delay. The idea of having a cap or a limit on the number of flights is something a number of you have raised with Uecna over the last 6 months or so, and there was quite a lengthy discussion at our online conference, which many of you are at in November. So it was felt it might be useful to do a webinar looking at caps at airports, limits of flights at airports, to look at the various aspects of them and then discuss it. So what I'm going to do in the next little while, and I'll only speak for about 10 minutes or so, it's to cover these points. First of all, I think it's generally felt that a cap or a limit on the number of flights is usually wanted by local communities, is wanted by residents. Then I look at how realistic it actually is to have a cap. I'll explore 1 or 2 airports which do have caps and see what lessons we can learn from them. And then I look at different types of caps. It can be an annual cap, it could be an hourly cap, it could be a daily cap, it could be a night cap, day cap. It could be a cap rather than at the airport as a whole over particular communities. And finally, I will look at what type of cap it might be. It could be a cap on the number of flights using the airport. It could be a noise cap. It could be a cap on passengers. It could be an emissions cap. I look at each of these in turn, and then, as Elefthera said, we'll go into questions and discussion. It's an odd thing these days that if we think back 50 years ago, individual planes were noisier than they are now. Some of them were much noisier. Yet the number of complaints over the last half decade, over the last half century, has gone up rather than down. And I've often wondered why this is. And I think the message coming from most communities is it is the huge increase in the number of planes there has been over the last 30 years in particular, and that has cancelled out a lot of the noise benefits from having individual planes a bit quieter than they were. So flight numbers are critical for communities. If there is a cap at an airport, most communities who have an airport with a cap will say it provides some certainty for them, some reassurance on the total number of flights that they can experience. And therefore, they tend to welcome it. But how practical is a cap? ICAO, which many of you will know is the International Civil Aviation Organization, which sets many of the worldwide rules and regulations for aviation. They say that when airports are considering noise, now emissions are separate, but if they're considering noise, they must take 4 steps in this order. First of all, they must look at reduction of noise at source, that is, generally speaking, less noisy planes. Secondly, they must look at land use planning and management, that is, how many homes are built, particularly new homes are built under a flight path. Thirdly, they must look at noise abatement operational procedures, that is, how planes are flown, as they're arriving or departing from an airport. And only fourthly, once they've done all that, are they allowed to look at operating restrictions. Now, a cap on the number of flights is clearly an operating restriction. Yet that hasn't, and it's only number 4, yet that has not prevented a cap or a limit being introduced at some airport. And I want now just to go through those airports, or some of those airports where a cap has been introduced. The 2 I'm most familiar with are Heathrow and London City. As Elavathira said, for 20 years, from the year 2000 until 2020, I coordinated HACAN, which gives a voice to residents under the Heathrow flight paths. All that time, and still today, Heathrow has a cap of 480,000 flights a year. Now that cap came about in 2001. It was one of the conditions, it was the big condition that was laid down for Heathrow to get its 5th terminal. The inspector at the public inquiry said that Heathrow could only get its 5th terminal if the airport agreed to a cap of 480,000 per year. And the government agreed with the inspector. The cap has never been exceeded. If Heathrow was to exceed the cap, it would have to go through quite a complex planning inquiry, probably have to go back to a public inquiry. So there's a big disincentive for the airport to exceed the cap. Until COVID, most years, about 475,000, 476,000 planes used Heathrow. But so far, it may change, but so far the cap has not been exceeded. And that has given some certainty to residents. London City is a much smaller airport. It only opened in 1987. It's a bit like Ciampino Airport in Italy, or the airport in the middle of Belo Horizonte in Brazil. People, as you can see from that picture, live very, very close to the airport. It's the old docklands, and people lived very close to where they worked on the docks. It was really because the people lived so close to the airport when it was opened in 1987 that a key condition of the airport opening was there needed to be a limit, a cap on the number of flights. Now in 1987, the cap was much lower than it is today. What has happened over the years since 1987, London City has successfully applied to the planning authority for the cap to be raised. And it's now at 111,000 per year. I think many people in the locality would argue that is very high for an airport which overflies so many people and where people live so close to it. But like Heathrow, it has given some sort of certainty to the local communities of how many planes they're likely to expect. What's really interesting is what's happening at Schiphol, and there are, I'm glad to say, a number of people from Schiphol on the webinar today who may want to talk a little bit more about this than myself. You will know more about it than myself. The Dutch government is requiring Schiphol to reduce the cap, to reduce it from 500,000 per year to 440,000 per year. And we think that's the first time this has ever happened, this sort of reduction, certainly at a major airport. I believe that in due course, and the reason for doing that is noise. I believe in due course, they might also be looking to introduce an emissions cap. As I say, it is quite complex, and some of our friends from the Netherlands may want to talk a little bit more about it in the discussion. Now, you can have a number of caps. Mostly we think of an annual cap. That's what Heathrow's got, that's what London City's got, that's what Schiphol's got. But you could have instead a cap, a daily cap, or a weekly cap, or a cap on the number of flights allowed over any community on a particular hour. Or you could have a mixture of those caps. I know our friends in at Brussels Airport are pressing for a mixture of an hourly cap and an annual cap. You can see the advantage of an hourly cap because it means that the number of flights in a particular hour can be limited, so it won't be one after the other. But interestingly too, you can have, and it's my last point on this slide, a cap over each particular community, rather than a total cap of the number of flights using the airport. And this is quite, certainly when I was at Heathrow, this interests a lot of communities, because for many people in communities who are overflown, their main interest is not necessarily the total number of planes using the airport. Their main interest is the total number of planes which fly over their community. Now, it may be complex, it may be too complicated to do, but it's certainly something that many of the communities that I've spoken to over the years would very much welcome. I think the point was raised by Dominic at the beginning, that if you have a cap at one particular airport, that might result in some of the planes going to a nearby airport. That wouldn't happen in every case, because some of the nearby airports may be too far away, or they may not be set up to take the right sort of planes, but it is certainly something that we need to be aware of. But the other thing you can have is different types of caps. I suppose the most common one, and the one we think of first of all, is a cap on the number of flights. That's what Heathrow's got, that's what London City's got, that's what Schiphol's talking about. There can also be a cap on the number of passengers. Stansted, which is one of the airports in the London region, has got a cap on the number of passengers rather than the number of flights. So that's a possibility. There could be a cap on noise, total noise emitted, rather than the total number of planes. I want at this point to say something about noise quotas, because the airlines at Heathrow say to us that the 480,000 cap is all very nice for residents, but it doesn't really give them any incentive to use quieter planes. Whereas if there was a noise quota, which is like a noise cap, that would incentivize them to use quieter planes, because essentially what it's saying is they could bring in more planes as long as the overall noise level did not increase. Now, I can understand where the airlines are coming from on this, and it is something that we need to think about. I suppose there is the possibility of having both a noise quota and a numbers cap, but it is something for us to maybe talk about in the discussion. And finally, I think there's probably the possibility of an emissions cap. As far as I know, that hasn't been done at any airport, but there's no reason why it should. Whether it would reduce the total number of planes, again, is something for discussion. So my last slide it's a worldwide cap. Now, I don't mean a total cap across the world on the number of planes flying in the sky. Those of you who were at our online conference in November will remember that there was a lot of interest in doing airports around Europe and indeed beyond, in America, Australia, South America, and elsewhere, having a joint day of action. And the theme that people were interested in was to call for a cap or a limit of whatever sort. It would be different. It would vary from airport to airport on this particular day. And it's something that Uecna, as many of you will know, has begun to coordinate. We're not organizing all the events. In fact, we're not organizing any of the events. We are coordinating it. But the sort of events it would be entirely up to you if you wanted to take part, and if you did, what event you could do. You could have a colorful stunt with everybody maybe outside the airport wearing a worldwide cap, like you see there. It could simply be a press release or a report that you issue, but we certainly would be interested in hearing from yourselves if in principle you'd be interested in taking part in such an international, such a day of action. And as I say, it would be on the 26th of April, because that ties in nicely with International Noise Awareness Day. So feel free to email us and let us know if you wish to take part, if you haven't already done so. That's it, Dominic. So I'll try and stop sharing my screen rather more rapidly than I started sharing my screen, and we hope we can go into discussion.
Hello, John. Thank you for this presentation. Always interesting. There's been some discussions already in the chat, and a question about whether caps could be applicable to private jets, and the answer is already in the chat. Obviously, caps could be for all types of aviation of aircraft, and including helicopters, leisure aircraft, private jets. But another question has a more difficult answer to it, which is a cap at airports will not reduce greenhouse gas. It will prevent the airport from growing too fast, but it will not reduce the climate impact. So how can we, what can we do to also act on the climate impact of aviation, knowing that we're asking for caps for noise issues more than maybe climate issues?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, Dominic. I think it won't directly impact on climate issues, but it will indirectly, because clearly if you have a cap on the number of flights at an airport, that limits the number of flights which are flying, which will in itself reduce emissions. It won't necessarily affect the distance planes fly, because from, there's long haul and short haul. But if, for example, there was at London City, there's 111,000 right now. If that cap was raised to 120,000, that would mean more planes, more emissions. If it was reduced, it would reduce the emissions, but I agree, it's indirect rather than direct.
Okay, Bertold, if you have questions, please raise your hand.
Yes.
Either real hand, but we won't see it much. Otherwise, you have I think it's somewhere you can raise
yes, I see Bertold has got his hand up.
Bertold was first, then Debbie. Okay.
Yes, some months ago, I visited a very interesting webinar regarding contrails, and the German flight control organization, they presented an approach to that planes may be directed around or above zones where contrails can be generated. It is possible to identify the critical zones and to direct the planes around or above these zones. And they said this is only possible if you have not too much traffic, and less traffic in the air has the consequence that you have more possibilities to direct the planes around or above the critical zones.
I didn't know that, Berto. That's very interesting indeed. So you know, keep us posted. But that's an interesting fact. Shall we go to Debbie next?
Hi,
Hello, Debbie. Hi, good to see you again.
good to see you. So John and Dominique, will you guys do a Zoom meeting with me? Just
There's-
later on, just the two of you. If you have an opportunity, I'm doing the Airport Noise and Emissions Symposium this year on health. And I gathered some fascinating information I want to share with you guys. And I have a few questions from you as well. And I want to report to you some of the discussion going on. I think it's very important for you to know what's happening here.
Debbie, love to do it. We can't do it straight after today because Dominique's got another meeting. But I'll set up a Zoom meeting between the three of us, and we look forward to it.
Okay. So now my question is, do you have independent verification that the airport is adhering to the cap?
Yes, we do it. Yes, we do. I can't speak for Schiphol because I don't know so much about it, but certainly at Heathrow, yes, and at London City, it's then Heathrow came very close 1 year to 480,000, but it hasn't exceeded it. Yeah.
Okay. I would say too that aviation not working, engine manufacturers, airframe manufacturers not working toward quieter aircraft that's ridiculous, because there's so few airports around the world that have a cap. For them to say that they're not working on reducing noise from aircraft is ridiculous.
No, absolutely.
That's an excuse.
You'll remember the rather good webinar we had from I've just forgotten his name for a second, but the young man who worked in aviation, and he was saying much the same.
Finley Asher.
Yes,
Finley, yes.
That engines have kind of reached the apex of what they can do to control the noise without some major changes that's not within the scope of the industry to do. And there are airframe modifications that can be made to quiet the aircraft, but the primary noise that's coming out of the engines is, it's always going to be something the industry is working on. And maybe that excuse is a precursor to them saying, I'm sorry, we can't do anymore.
Well, I think, I mean, it's a slightly different topic we're talking about today, Debbie, but certainly what Finley was saying is that they are struggling to reduce noise, and what they will particularly struggle to do in technical terms is reduce noise and reduce emissions. So you're right. There's a problem there. Dominique, shall I just take the hands as they are?
Yes. Then it's Michael. Yeah. After Debbie.
I have to leave. Thank you, you guys. I have another meeting.
We'll set up a Zoom call, Debbie.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, so it's Audrey now.
Okay.
Oh, Audrey's gone?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
No, Michael's here as well. He disappeared. He disappeared from the screen for a second, Michael. And we.
So Michael first. Go, Michael.
Sorry, Audrey.
Thank you. I think the main contradiction in the discussion about caps is that the fact that we need a dynamic reduction. We, for instance, have a special number. We have a cap on an airport, for instance, in Frankfurt, and we have a success in cancel short-haul flights. They will fill it up with other flights, and they are still under the cap of numbers of flights.
Yeah.
So we have so only possibility is to have a cap which is really, really low.
Yeah, Michael, on top, if you have a cap on the number of flights, it's also easier, and we've seen it at Orly Airport, for instance, where there's a cap plus a night curfew. We've seen that the noise has increased, and why? Because the aircraft are bigger, so they're adding passengers with larger aircraft, making more noise. So when we discuss the cap, it's not sufficient. We need to discuss everything around the cap as well.
No, I would agree. I would agree with that, Dominique. Yes.
I just wanted to show one contradiction which I see. That is that if you have a number, for instance, if you have other possibilities or laws or something else, that the special flights are not allowed in back and forth. Yeah, short haul flights, the minimum, are not allowed. Then you have to go under the cap. Yeah, but the other sides will say, "Oh, we have this cap. What do you want? We have the cap, and what we do under the cap." So I see, okay, you can combine it with the noise cap and other emission cap, but it's very complicated. So I think we have to be very carefully, but John said it already.
Yes. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Michael. Next, I think, John, and next is Audrey, because she disappeared and then she came back with her hand raised, but she was next in line before Joss.
You're on mute, Audrey.
Okay, I didn't understand it was my turn. Yes, what I would like to say first is that I think maybe we need to say something important, is that a cap is a step, but the objective is to decrease the traffic at the end, both for noise and for climate. And those two objectives, they use the same leverage. So it's great to go for a cap first, which stops growing, and the same for noise and climate. It stops noise and climate impact growing. And then we need to target a decrease. Of course, it's more long term because of the context. But the ideal thing is to do both at the same time, like Schiphol does. They add a cap and they decrease the cap. What we ask in Roissy, for example, is a cap, but decrease versus the air traffic of 2019. What I wanted to say, that I think it's really great that we gather to talk about this. But what we really need to talk about, I think, is, of course, it's great to do the Action Day, and it's great to do it in a European level, but it's also important to share best practice to be able to get this cap, because it's very difficult. You said it, John. And different countries have different experience. Something work, other things don't work. It depends on countries. But anyway, we really, and that's what we feel in France, in Roissy, that we need to learn from other experiences. And maybe it's not this time, tonight, that we're gonna do it, but really have this space and maybe do other meetings to share and to think together about strategies, because maybe we need to find new things, but it will be much more powerful if we do it together.
You are very
Audrey,
right. Sorry.
just to come in very quickly, Audrey, I couldn't agree more about sharing best practice and learning from each other. Part of what Uecna is trying to do is exactly that. But I think the more we can do that, the better, because different countries, different airports are in different places, and we have an awful lot to learn from each other. Couldn't agree more.
And we have, John, we have a working group on CAPS as well. So if people want to join, I mean, everyone is welcome to join and think about how we can act to have CAPS at airports and learn from each other's, as Audrey said.
Yep, absolutely, Audrey. We'll drop you an email.
Joss, this is your turn.
Well, thank you. Yes, we're, as I said, and I've sent you an update, we're in the midst of campaigning in Brussels and among other things we're asking is a total cap, annual cap. We also want night flights to stop. And we've also asked for quieter planes, so quite an ambitious agenda. Now, what I would like to underline, and first of all, thank you very much, John, for, I would say, structuring the complexity of the caps. You illustrated it also very well with the numerous caps in slides. You can look at it in many ways. The problem is we may want caps. We may even dream about it. The problem is we won't impose them. In fact, we need in most cases, the political and the economic lobbies to agree to them. Now, making them to agree to something, I think we would benefit from making it as simple as possible. That's why we go in our campaign. We have 235,000 flights at Brussels airport, so we would like to see a reduction, or we don't want it to increase. The number of night flights, we want to, currently it's 16,000, we want it to phase out. Very simple, because it's going to be extreme. If you start about noise quotas or measuring, noise, becomes very complicated. I know our friends in the Commission, in the European Commission, are working on a noise legal framework, and they say it's very important that you set, from the outset, noise limits. But to sell it to the political level and to get a decision, which is going to work, I think we need to keep it simple. And one particular concern I have with one of the examples you introduced is to have a cap on flights overflowing or flying over particular communities. Right. This introduces a potentially, I would say, explosive political agenda, because we've very much agreed that a community will be, I would say, suffering more than the neighbor community, and they will say we are treated unfairly. So the frequency of flights over our heads has to diminish. And so you can say, okay, we can start fighting for that. But just as Dominic said, that if we have caps at an airport, they will squeeze out planes and noise to other airports. In the same way, you could have the effect, and you would most probably, and we have experienced it here in Brussels, if you reduce noise and particularly frequencies over a particular community, you're bound to move it to a next community, and you get a very NIMBY type of not in my backyard agenda. The problem with that is that politicians they will say, okay, let them fight. You know, look at all these communities, they're fighting, they don't, then one wants more, and it produces a stalemate. We have experienced this in Brussels for several decades. This has blocked the whole issue. So I would really advocate to be very careful about opening that Pandora box, because this is in fact it's a can of worms, because and this may sound very unfairly towards the communities which are most overflown, but I think we have to fight for them in a different way, and that is by capping total numbers, by reducing the noise at night, capping completely night flights, reducing QCs, the quota counts of planes, and those are the main three, because they tackle mostly, I would say not mostly, but wholly noise at the source. Whereas, when you are introducing communities, you are starting to open a can. Okay, you get a bit too much, we'll shift it somewhere else, and that's a non-starter for politicians. Politicians say we cannot afford to, I would say, to make certain communities happy at the expense of others, unless they are politicians who have particular groups of people in that area which will vote at local level for them. So I'm just saying that this is a very, very risky thing. We would, and that's my conclusion is, let's go for, I would say, more straightforward caps than introducing too much sophistication in it.
That's a really interesting contribution, Jos. Yes, when I talk about reducing flights over particular communities, you're absolutely right. It would, if it couldn't be done in a fair way, it shouldn't be even attempted. I agree. On the simplicity point, absolutely right. I mean, it may be at different airports have different asks, but each ask, whatever it is, needs to be simple, needs to be straightforward, so public understand it, so politicians understand it, so press understand it. Absolutely right.
John, Bob is, there's Bob, Armel, and someone called iPhone, but we'll call him Rob. So Bob, Armel, and Rob. Bob, it's your turn. Yes.
Okay, thank you for letting me speak. And I'm glad that there are quite a few participants tonight. I can give you some more information about the Schiphol situation.
Right.
It was announced as a major breakthrough to set a cap on 440K flights. But meanwhile, my impression of what's happening now is that the aviation sector is working hard to diminish the effect of the cap by raising it. Actually, they have announced what they call an experiment to start at the end of this year and to run for 1 year, where they raised the cap already to 460,000. So that's one thing I'd like to mention. So it sounds good, but it's very fluid, those caps. In addition to that, and that's also very relevant, people are changing, and I know it happens at Schiphol, but perhaps on many other airfields as well, to the new navigation system, Next Gen or PBN. And that allows that flight paths are concentrated over areas. And now what you see is that the aim of our aviation sector is to concentrate those flight paths over areas with fewer people. So you get a shift from noise from the regions very close to the airport to regions wider away where less people are living. Of course, those people will be confronted with what they called concentrated flight path in the future, with a situation that they can have hours and hours of noise of one plane after the other. And it's also defended, this whole move is defended by restructuring the airspace in Europe. And some frames are being made like CO2 reduction by having more direct flight path over in countries. And in addition to that, one promises less noisier planes. But actually, if you look at the metrics like L10 and L9, you always see that any measure to reduce noise is counter-affected by increasing the numbers of flights. So in addition to everything I said, it sounds wonderful at the beginning, but there are some caveats to think about when you talk about flight caps and the situation in Amsterdam. Thank you.
That's a really useful update from Amsterdam, Bob. On the PBN or the next gen, I mean, the people here on the call who, particularly from America, who I know are suffering this very badly indeed. My feeling is that if those concentrated flight paths are going to come in, we need alternation of flight paths. We need some sort of respite, because it's at most airports it's just really, as you said, not acceptable to have one plane after another going over the same community.
Well, actually, if you look at the situation, that you don't get any details on the number of these paths, where they are supposed to be, and the number of planes per unit of time that these paths will have to endure. No information whatsoever.
Yeah. I think yes. I mean, I think at some airports, certainly some airports in the UK, there, the Civil Aviation Authority, which the CAA, which is in kind of overall charge in the UK, they've laid down some quite detailed guidelines for the introduction of these PBN routes at UK airports, and it does require a fair element of consultation and information. But they only laid them down because the situation over the last few years, going back 5 or 6 years, was as you described, Bob. It wasn't good. It is getting a little bit better.
Have you got a reference for these guidelines so they can?
Bob. Yeah, listen. I can. If we've got your email, I'll email them across, because
okay, they'll be fine. Yes.
Yeah. I can't quite get them right now, but I will email them across. I'm just writing this down. So Dominic, we probably can go on to I think Armel.
To Armel, yes.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and a happy new year, although it's only February. I just wanted to, I mentioned Debbie was asking about verifications. Well, you can verify anything you want with Heathrow Airport. They tell you it doesn't happen. We had a meeting recently of the local community around the airport when one councillor said that 2 nights running, she heard the engine being fitted or engine trials before the, in the middle of the night. When she explained that to Heathrow, they said, oh, this is very strictly limited. They have to ask permission, but in certain circumstances, they can allow it. I have spoken to her yesterday and she said it never happened. So, verification, you've got to really trust your airport that what they say is true. And it's happened to other people and to myself as well. Nightcap, which we have at Heathrow Airport, which Geraldine mentioned. Well, that is fine, nightcaps. But actually, they can't find any dispensation to actually tell you why they are ignoring them. So, and the dispensation are so wide, if you've got too much snow, that's about, I don't know, maybe 1 centimeter on the runway. If you've got some fog, if you've got some wind, so everything is displaced. And then suddenly it actually, we've got flights until 2 or 2:30 at night. I mean, I live next to Heathrow, so I'm not being overflown, but we've got more noise than anybody else. Anybody living around the airport will probably suffer more. Bob did mention the airspace modernization, and I'm involved with our group around the airport and right into London and even further about airspace modernization. And although we are also fighting to sort of, not even have 480,000, but making sure that we don't have any more. I mean, we obviously would like to stop the night flights as well. It's going to be very difficult. I mean, just Bob was mentioning about sort of flying over areas where there is nobody living. Well, you can't do it at Heathrow because Heathrow is in the wrong place. So it doesn't matter where they take off, where they land, where they fly, they will affect communities. And to actually, we were talking recently about Richmond Parks when they've got deers and that sort of thing. So, a place of what they call special scientific interest. But Heathrow is going to actually impact somebody somewhere. And with the airspace modernization, it's going to get worse than it is now. Interestingly enough, Heathrow has got a lot of power which they've never used. Last year, where they were incapable of running more than 100,000 passengers in their building per day because they hadn't got their staff on the ground, they imposed a limit to all the airlines. So it was a cap, and it lasted for about possibly 2 or 2.5 months, where they told all the airlines 100,000 passengers per day. We don't care how you do it, but you have to do it. So they have actually created a precedent for the power that they have. And now when they said, oh, we can't do this or we can't do that, I actually said, well, I'm sorry, you can, because you've proved that when you couldn't cope with the number of passengers, you were able to actually tell the airline. So the airports, I think, have got a lot of power. And that's something certainly as a big group, we need to play on. But ultimately, I think it is right. We've got to limit the number of flights, limit the number of passengers, and otherwise, probably by 2030, we won't have a planet. So thank you very much indeed.
Dominique, just before iPhone comes in, just to say to Bob that Nick has put in the chat the CAA details, the guidelines for the CAA details. If you still need them, Bob, let me know. And you've helpfully also put your Twitter handle in the account, so if need be, I can tweet them to you. Dominique, over to you, and probably over to iPhone.
No, it's, yes, sorry, it's the person called iPhone. You're raising your hand. You're the next one.
Is that me? Hello.
Hello.
All right. Yeah, I'm new to the discussion. Hello, my name is Volker. I call in from the Liège area, one of the major cargo hubs. I am a former air traffic controller and active pilot, and have been involved in European projects for about 2 decades. What comes to mind quickly, the PBN story is, of course, a knife which cuts on both sides. I think you nicely explained it. Nevertheless, there comes a lot of opportunity with it, and pressing into that direction has certain advantages, I think, also for the noise. Brings me to the main point. I don't know if it has been addressed, but European ATM has vast inefficiencies which materialize also in additional noise. Talking, for example, about continuous descent approaches which have been trialed for decades, but which are still not, well, maybe except for Amsterdam, which are in most European cities not in place as we speak. And if you want a quick win on the noise front, honestly, that is something which could be done provided you have the right capacity, provided you have the will, and provided you have the the political and the procedural will which could be implemented tomorrow. And that is, for complicated reason, I agree, not happening as we speak. I mean, these opportunities to have low drag approaches and stuff, reducing, by the way, fuel consumption as well, and noise are not happening. And they are not happening because of financial interest. And that is, I think, the key point we have to address, because ATC at the moment, as we speak, is unfortunately still providing maximum capacity in order to get maximum throughput. So exactly what the opposite what you're trying to achieve, trying to regulate the flow of air traffic with financial constraints. The service provided is basically maximizing business, and that is something which I think fundamentally could be changed, and it could be changed relatively quickly. Meaning, if you just change the task and you tell the air traffic controller from a procedure design and from an executive point of view to reduce the noise impact and have flight profiles which are which have a minimum environmental impact, I think you would have immediately gains. And that pressure, I'm just wondering, are you, obviously you don't have the insight, but I think that is something which, especially now under the circumstances which we are now with regard to CO2 reduction and all the rest, is just not happening. And I talk from the inside because basically what is happening also in my organization is perfect greenwashing. I mean, you try to camouflage it with some green ideas, and not much is happening. Thanks.
Listen, thank you very much for that. That's really interesting and useful. I personally agree. You're absolutely right. There are potentially quick wins at a lot of airports. CDA, continuous descent approach. It is happening at Heathrow. And it is happening at some of the other airports. But you're quite right. There's major airports where it could happen and it's not happening. And you know, you're right. There's other operational things which could be done quickly and relatively painlessly as well. So thanks very much for that. I think we're going to jump, Dominique, aren't we, across the Atlantic?
Just one quick one. I mean,
yes.
What you call, I mean, that is very important. I mean, you are not inside, and I excuse, you are completely
yes.
excused. But what people call today continuous descent approach,
yes.
and what me as a pilot or even as a former air traffic controller, what I would consider a continuous descent approach, I'm sorry, there is a huge gap. Yeah, there is a huge gap, and a real continuous descent approach, to be quite honest, I would challenge it. Maybe at nighttime in Amsterdam, you have occasionally a real continuous descent approach. That means that the aircraft basically glides in until 3 miles, configures and lands. So it's basically a glider. That is a continuous descent approach. That is hardly implemented somewhere. What they call continuous descent approach is something better than a conventional approach, but that is not a real CDA. Sorry, it's not.
I agree with that. And even at Heathrow, there is still within the CDA, there is still some level flying which is taking place. You're absolutely right.
Ellen, you're very right about CDA. Completely agree with you. Maybe Ellen, you want to come in, and then Martin.
Yes, I just want to speak very briefly, and thank you for the previous speaker, because I think he hits the nail on the head when we're talking about we want to decrease flights, and then we're up against an industry that is always looking to increase flights. So, you know, and we're going to lose each and every time because we don't have the finances, and we're not giving great amounts of money to politicians for their campaigns or lobbyists. So it becomes a very difficult situation for us. But I do believe that there's strength in numbers. I just want to comment briefly on the PBN, and I just want to tell you what is happening here in America. in 2011, the beginning of 2012 here on Long Island, Nassau County. I live on Nassau County, Long Island, New York. And that's when the PBN came into being to use. And that whole idea of constricted flight paths, one after the other, has been devastating to our communities. It is an unbearable situation. We can get flights, arrivals coming in, and people who are living in communities 20 miles out are having very low flying planes in one after another. We call it the Arc of Doom. They're about 1,700, 1,800 feet, and that continues for 10, 15, 20 miles. Arrivals will not ascend, so they're flying I wouldn't say particularly linear, but certainly they just make very, very few altitude increases until they get much, much farther out. So our communities that are under that flight path. So what we ask for is dispersal. And I can't remember, I think it was Joss who said that, you know, people will say not in my backyard, you know, the NIMBYs, but we are asking for dispersals. We cannot, the airlines or the FAA will say, we have eliminated noise in so many areas, and the large part of the population is not receiving the noise. But it means that a small segment of the population is receiving all of the noise, all of it. We don't get a break. We don't get, so days on end, 5 days, 7 days of nonstop flights. And it's just unbearable. So PBN is a nightmare. It also brings in so many health issues that we're experiencing. And we have discussed that numerous times. So the PBN is not what it is. If you can fight it, I don't know how you will, because the airlines love it. The airlines absolutely love PBN. They, you know, it saves them on fuel. They say it cuts down on any problems with, you know, delays, flight delays. So they push it, and they have the money to push it, and they have the money behind them. So the PBN is really has been an abusive assault on our communities. So I just wanted to let you people know. I'm surprised that you don't have, you know, I thought that you had more PBN flight paths in Europe.
There's still. Thanks for that, Elaine. They're beginning to come in. They're certainly beginning to come in Europe, and in the UK, they're expected to come in over the next few years. As I said before, my feeling is that it's not justified to have them all over a particular community. We do need alternation of flight paths. Dominique, I'm just wondering if whether Martin becomes the last speaker, because we're coming up to the hour, and exactly. Then maybe I'll just say a word or two at the end.
Exactly. Martin, it's your turn.
Thank you. Good evening, and apologies for being late to join. I'm in the Southern Hemisphere and a different time zone. But let me give you an alternative view. First of all, we have to recognize that the aviation industry has invested a lot of money in PBN. The flight management systems and the coding of all that has all been done. They've invested millions in using GPS technology for more accurate and consistent navigation. So in answer to last speaker, and I do agree and sympathize, we have to live with the fact that we will have very narrow flight paths. But John has given us the lead here. In UK, and I've already, where I am, the local airport, we're using PBN already. And John has given the lead by saying what we must insist on is alternative flight paths so that we can get respite. Now there is absolutely no chance at all, in my view, that we'll get flight paths being as they were in the old days of terrestrial navigation, of being dispersed. So the solution, in my view, and it's a win-win when you think about it, because if we can persuade our aviation authorities to make sure that new routes, as they're put through in civil aviation terms, we have alternative routes to provide respite. That seems to me to be the way ahead. Coming back to the earlier comments, in UK, we do have CDA and continuous climb operations, and they are successful. And so I really ask people to be supportive for CDA from 6,000 or 7,000 feet down. Plus, the prospect, and airlines have trialed this, the prospect is we can get steeper flight paths, so 3 degrees for normal CDA. Now they've shown you can do 3.5. And modern aircraft climb performance is much improved. So the normal 4%, which is a 3-degree angle of climb, can be increased. So all these things are coming down the pike, and I just exhort everybody to grasp these technological advances and make sure that your own civil aviation authorities actually incorporate them in the planning. John's mentioned we have a thing called the Airspace Modernization Program here, and no doubt other countries have got the same. And that's the opportunity to make sure we can get some of these improvements which will improve the noise impacts and the health impacts on society. Thank you.
Martin, thank you for that. Just before you wrap up, Dominic, just for me to remind people, you might have been going to do it anyway, but the our next webinar is on Monday, the 6th of March at the same time. And Debbie, who was on the call earlier on, Debbie Wagner, she will be talking about ultrafine particles, which is a subject we haven't covered before, but a lot of people have said they want to know more about it. And Debbie is an expert on it. So that should be good. As usual, we'll put notification around. But back to you, Dominic.
Yes, thank you, John. This was a very interesting discussion, not just on CAPS, but going on other subjects as well, like PBN and and I saw some discussions about increase of night flights last summer due to the delays at European airports and no fines being applied to these late aircraft despite breach of environmental regulations at airports, or maybe that would be a subject for discussion later as well. Thanks a lot. I hope that there will be a lot of people, a lot of groups which will act and organize something on the 26th of April for the Action Day. We will try maybe to have a common just piece of we're discussing today at the moment that there's a group working on how this is going to happen, but we need you, in fact, to organize something at your airport, and we want just to coordinate and show something which is show that it's happening everywhere in Europe at all airports at the same time. Many thanks for attending today. And I hope you'll be, there will be a lot of you again at our next webinar. And some people asked for the chat, so I will send it to you. Have a good evening. Thanks a lot.